We want to first just get sort of you thinking about your partnerships with the workforce system, and in the chat box, if you could, what we're hoping you can do is just be thinking about, what are your biggest pain points or challenges that you might have with between education and workforce partnerships. Not to say that they're necessarily painful, but they can be challenging. They're two very different systems, and there's always a lot of, I think, interpreting that needs to happen. There's a lot of expertise that exists on both sides, and it's trying to figure out what that partnership can look like and how to really leverage and maximize the resources that you have to do the work. And so if you could just kind of talk with your team for a quick second. Are there pain points or challenges with your education and workforce partnerships, and any ideas or thoughts that you might have kind of coming into the session that you think, we really are struggling with X and we'd like to get some ideas around that? I think if you can kind of tell us a little bit about that, it'll help our presenters kind of cater some of their thoughts and remarks today based on that. And I think some come in here. We see too distant to provide services on a regular continuous basis. So we've got kind of geographic challenges. Age restrictions prohibit placement in tours in some industries. So it sounds like, potential conversations with industry partners. Sometimes there are too many programs occurring that it can be confusing for our students to keep up on what to do. Most partners are interested in working with college-age students, especially for internships, so kind of a population focus that may be slightly not aligned. So those are really helpful. Feel free to continue to add those in as you're thinking about this topic. But we are going to jump in. The real expertise is from our guest presenters today, your colleagues. Adelina Garcia, she is a Senior Program Manager from the Pathways to Prosperity at Jobs for the Future, JFF. And one of their grantees is the Marlborough Partnership. So Laura Puritan, who is the STEM Career Specialist at the Partnerships for a Skilled Workforce, which is on the workforce side, and then Dan Riley, who's the Director of STEM Early College High School with Marlborough Public Schools. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a little bit of a kind of an interview format, and so I'm going to kind of throw some questions at Adelina, Laura, and Dan, and we are going to just have them answer them and share kind of their experience with partnering between kind of the school system and the workforce board. So let's get started. So I think this first question I have is really for Adelina, and then maybe Dan and Laura can jump in. But the first question really is around your model. What is JFF's model and approach? So if you can just give us a little bit of an overview, we'll start there and then kind of dive in.
I can. And before I move to the next slide and really dive in to answer that question, I just wanted to mention a few things about JFF to kind of set the context here. So JFF is a national nonprofit organization that works across the education, training, and workforce pipeline in 42 states. And our mission is really to improve economic mobility for in-school youth, out-of-school youth, and adults, especially among low-income populations. So we were one of few intermediary organizations nationwide to receive the YCC grant, and we work with 2 other regions besides Marlborough to implement YCC here in Massachusetts. And our position as the fiscal agent on this grant has given us a unique opportunity to work across these 3 different sites. And the reason why we're presenting with Marlborough today is because out of the 3 sites that we work with, Marlborough's workforce education partnership is really the most advanced. Marlborough built an early college, high school, the school within a school sort of model using Race to the Top funds several years ago, and they've really used their YCC money strategically to build out the career readiness component and expand their STEM pathways. And so with that kind of in mind, I want to share, this is the Pathways to Prosperity model that our YCC programs are modeled after. And so here, what you see is an integrated grades 9 to 14 college and career pathways. And these pathways really integrate rigorous academics and career-focused learning so that all students have exposure to real-world connections in the classroom. And they integrate interdisciplinary project-based learning as well as work-based learning and exposure to the world of work, evidenced in, as you can see, those circles on the bottom, a continuum of gradually deepening engagement with the workforce and skilled labor, starting with internships and other work-based learning opportunities, which you'll hear more about shortly. And the outcomes that we really hope to accomplish through this model in general are to build systems of sustainable college and career pathways that increase the talent pipeline of young professionals, ensuring that employers can close the gap, the skills gap, and that state and regional economies are really thriving and growing. Our goal with all of this is to prepare all young people for college and career, to make sure that they're really well positioned for success in both. And this is through engaging in credit-bearing college courses in high school before they graduate, through earning a post-secondary credential with value in the labor market, so that they can launch into careers in high-demand, high-wage, high-growth fields that will provide them with family-sustaining wages over time and opportunities to advance their careers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marlborough to talk about their model.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Dan Riley from Marlborough Public Schools. So the way I'm going to kind of summarize this slide, as you can read through it, is that we encourage our employer partners to sort of methodically connect, engage, mentor, and possibly help us supervise our students throughout their work-based learning trajectory. And that looks different at each point in the pipeline. You can see that in 9th grade, we try to foster career awareness. We encourage our employer partners to participate in our various, what's couched now as STEM events, and also to come in and kind of expose students to their industry, possibly through things like being a speaker or a panelist, and just helping to really get them exploring what that industry sector is all about. As we build upon that work, with more hands-on experiences in 9th and 10th grade, we invite them to come into classrooms and participate in some of our project-based learning experiences. We ask them to collaborate with teachers to help create sort of like an externship model that might not be as intense as something like Project Lead the Way, but at the same time gives our teachers more of an awareness of what's happening within those industry sectors and where they're going in the future. And then we also try to get our students out of the building and onto those sites so that they can tour various companies and see the work happening live. So sort of summarizing that 9th grade and partially that 10th grade experience as connecting and engaging. Moving into sophomore year specifically, we have developed, in partnership with our local Workforce Investment Board, a mentoring program where we have volunteers from our industry partnerships come in and work with a small group of students 4 times a year. And those experiences range from activities that help the students personalize with the industry partner in terms of how they got to where they are in their career, what steps they took, but then also exploring in more depth other areas of development, like, for example, 21st century skills. And we'll run various project activities that are team-building activities where the industry mentors do this side by side with the students, and it helps to build a stronger bond. And then, of course, getting into specifically exposing students to that area of industry and helping to support student thinking in terms of what they should be doing next if they want to continue to explore that area of industry. What's really important for us is at the conclusion of sophomore year, we will have a small number of students that will identify that that is not what they want to do. And for us, that's just as important as a student confirming that they want to continue to work towards fulfilling a pipeline in that particular industry sector. We want them to be passionate, but we also want them to know what they're signing up for. So it's a very important part of the pipeline for us. In 11th and 12th grade, we then try to get into more supervised, hands-on activities for the students, the most popular, of course, being internships. And we have been able to secure a number of internships at some very high-level global organizations like Raytheon and Dow and Boston Scientific. And we currently have 11 students doing an internship through GE Health, through their IT department. And so those experiences exist. But then we've also done a lot of outside-of-the-box thinking around generalized work-based learning experiences that would be very important for students. And so students will go into a company sometimes and produce value-added requirements that the company hasn't been able to fulfill with its own current staffing, whether that be app development or promotional materials for a certain department like some of our students did for the Marlborough Hospital. Those are the types of projects that still get students exposed to that industry sector, but sort of do it in a non-conventional way where we can sometimes circumvent organizations that have strict HR policies against students being on site before a certain age, for example. So with that, I will turn it to Adelina for the next slide.
And actually, you know, that's really helpful to hear a bit about your model and your overall approach. And I think, you know, digging into sort of the partnership discussion, generally, if you guys, Adelina and then Dan and Laura, maybe you can jump in, how have the workforce boards been a part of this model, and what roles have they played in implementation? And maybe you can talk a little bit about what has been kind of the workforce board's value add. And so I'll turn it over to Adelina to kind of start us off with that.
Sure. So the YCC grant clearly outlines the role of the workforce system in the implementation of the program. And the WIB really plays a very active, hands-on role in the day-to-day implementation. And so they are very much involved in the strategic planning, program development, day-to-day implementation. They manage all of the logistics related to career awareness, exposure, and exploration experiences, and also have led local sustainability planning. They cultivate partnerships with employers and coordinate their involvement in activities such as mentoring and internships and those sorts of things. They also play a role in, or have the goal of playing a role in connecting graduates. We're going to have a whole set of graduates after the school year, so connecting them to additional post-secondary opportunities, both education-wise as well as career-wise. As far as the value add goes, the WIBs are actually critically important. They are the ones who are really tilling the ground, developing and enhancing relationships with employers. They are the holders of those relationships with employers. employers, which actually really eases the burden on both the school/district as well as on employers themselves. As you can imagine, you know, teachers and school and district administration have a lot going on already at the school level, and so to add a whole, you know, set of responsibilities around partnership engagement is it's really hard to fit that in to their normal workload. And so the WIBs really play that intermediary role between employers and the schools, and really help to be the translators between them, as well as coordinate the logistics.
And if I could build off of that, at a more granular level, what we have done in collaboration with the WIB, but they are very much leading, is the continuous follow-up with our industry partners through the form of an industry, through a steering committee comprised of volunteer partners who want to keep the conversation going and address various topics. One of those being something that I touched upon earlier, which was how do we get our juniors and seniors involved in actual hands-on experiences that might not be classified as internships, but would still be extremely valuable to exposing them to that particular industry sector. And we continuously tackle these problems under the direction of the WIB, but build the agendas in collaboration. And more recently, we had a fantastic discussion with roughly 25 industry partners that volunteered to be a part of this. And what we really wanted to know is typically school districts, they go to the table and they do a lot of asking of industry partners. And so the partnership in many school districts is very much one way. This is what we need, can you help us with it? What we did during our April meeting was we flipped that conversation, and we went to the table, again, under the direction of the local WIB, to strictly listen to industry partners about what they needed. In other words, what types of pipeline programming could we develop in order to help some of their more immediate needs with entry-level positions? And it was an extremely valuable conversation because it got us thinking outside the box about what our academic day looks like, for example, and how they could best support students in those situations. Transitioning to the development, unless there are any questions, I was going to transition to the development of a common vision and why that's
great. Please.
So the vision in collaboration between the school system and the local WIB is important that both sides share an equal part in that development. School districts tend to know academically what they're striving for in terms of meeting the student needs. But local WIBs should have a workforce investment board, should have a better grip on what the global or the local economy is providing for opportunities for students. And so when we crafted our vision, it was very important for us to merge both sides of that. And I mentioned this earlier, but that's where we came up with the idea of going through a connecting and then an engaging and then a mentoring and a supervising sort of staged process for our students along that trajectory. As the school side of it, we were able to identify what was developmentally appropriate for students along the trajectory. And on the WIB side of it, they were able to help guide us on what steps might we need to take to really appropriately prepare students to someday be employees in particular industry sectors. So developing that common vision together was extremely important for the trajectory that we came out with. In terms of leveraging the financial and the human resources to kind of build the talent pipeline, again, the WIB has been able to bring us together with our local workforce partners and put this in more of sort of like a return on investment perspective, again, as opposed to we're a school district and we could really use this, can you help us fulfill it? There was an actual ROI that was now getting tied into the conversation in the form of a pipeline that could feed future employment needs. And so when we look to leverage financial and human resources in order to continue to build the talent within our pipeline, we believe it's extremely important for our industry partners to understand that ROI and how we can eventually lend value to their companies in the missions of their companies.
Great, that's really, really helpful. Thank you both for sharing that. That sort of gets us to kind of like digging in a little bit more kind of granular in terms of kind of what the partnership really looks like between the school and the Workforce Development Board. You've shared a bit already, but kind of getting down to sort of staffing and resource sharing. I know you touched upon, expertise sharing and drafting this common vision, but tell us a little bit about what that looks like in terms of sort of the staffing and resource sharing that you guys do, and how does that play out on the ground?
Absolutely. So in order to sort of meet the criteria that was presented to us through YCC, we dedicated part of that resource to funding a full-time STEM career specialist. And Laura would normally be here talking about that role. She's having some connection issues, just so in case everyone's wondering where she is, but she is trying to still get on the call. But we felt it was important to have a full-time person on the ground. And really what Laura does so well is she helps us communicate effectively the needs on both sides of the fence. She plays that sort of intermediary where if we are trying to achieve some sort of project-based learning experience for students in the earlier part of the program, she will connect and reach out to those industry partners and say, this is the project-based learning experience, and we're looking for experts in this area to come in and support students. One example of that is a couple years back, during the earlier part of the grant, we had the sophomore students undertaking a sustainability roofing project where they were using computer-aided design in order to finalize their sustainable roofing structures. And Laura reached out to several engineering companies that we partner with and said we would love to have some engineers, specifically some LEED certified engineers, come in and work side by side and offer some advice to the students as they complete this type of project. On a more granular level, Laura also coordinates and facilitates all of the work-based learning and internship experiences for the older students. So, for example, if there's a group of students that's going to be spending 2 weeks working at the Dow Chemical Company, Laura helps to facilitate what that is going to look like. If there's additional supervision requirements needed, like, for example, with that Dow experience, they asked if we could fund on our side a teacher to be there to support the students over the 2 weeks so that there was someone on the ground full-time that wasn't necessarily a dedicated employee of the company who would get pulled from their duties over a 2-week period. So she helped to facilitate identifying a teacher that was interested in participating in that, and we've reused that sort of similar supervision model with several internship opportunities, including the current one happening at GE Health. In addition to that, with at the end of the year, we host sort of like these career exposés where company partners can come in and actually see the products that students have developed throughout the year. And Laura helps to coordinate, or the STEM career specialist helps to coordinate who's going to volunteer to come in and, for example, judge the quality of the projects and give the students feedback along the way. So those are some examples of what specifically that role achieves for us, and it's a very busy position. We found out that the more you build, the more you need someone on the ground. She's also located in the school building full-time, which helps her with connecting, again, with the teachers and the students involved in these different work-based learning experiences. In terms of the steering committee itself, again, on the workforce investment side, the WIB helps us coordinate where meetings are going to take place, what the agendas should look like in order to achieve sort of the shared needs between the school district and our industry partners, in addition to crafting the agenda itself. So we receive that support as well from the person that's in that position.
Great. That is really helpful to just kind of get a better understanding of what that looks like on the ground. And having Laura in the school, I think, is really, I mean, I can only imagine how helpful that is to really be that intermediary between kind of the workforce system and the school district. Now, I don't know if Laura, I know Laura's trying to jump on, but another question maybe to you, Dan, and if Laura's able to join, thinking about the two different systems and needing someone to sort of translate and communicate between the two, that can be difficult. So I'm sure you've never experienced challenges, but maybe if you had one or two, what were those challenges in really trying to partner, and what kind of solutions have you come up with to address them? If you could speak to any sort of challenges you might have faced. Yeah, well,
I can talk about something that we do proactively to, number one, avoid the challenge of miscommunication, and that's sort of how we put things out there in front to our industry partners. In other words, we've worked together to collaboratively develop a number of different, like brochures, for example, that can very easily communicate to an industry partner that's coming on board. This is what we're trying to build towards, this is our vision, and this is how you can help. So immediately putting it out in front can avoid any miscommunications that might occur between a school district and an industry partner. And in terms of other obstacles, again, I think you did hit the nail on the head in that we have been able to overcome challenges by treating them just as so and saying if we work collaboratively, we can figure this out. I guess the most impactful for probably most people on this call was how we figured out the internship dilemma. In that, again, just to restate what I said earlier, it's very difficult for organizations with very strict HR policies to support school districts and more specifically students within school districts that want to get an actual work-based learning experience identified under the umbrella of internship. For example, many of our corporate partners are global organizations. And when you're dealing with a company like Raytheon, for example, who is very generous and very willing to collaborate, immediately out of the gate, they informed us, our interns are in graduate school. And so you're asking us now to take a look at interning high school students, but we can't see how that would even be feasible for our company. Although over time, again, in working and collaborating together, because Laura's position and the Workforce Investment Board's position helped us to continue the conversation so that it didn't just end with, we only do this at the graduate level of college, but we continued the conversation and we actually were able to identify a way of pairing up high school students with interns at the graduate level. And we kind of called it like this big fish, little fish type scenario, where if there's a particular project that's going on, and the one that comes to mind is actually out of the Dow Chemical Company, where we had a student who had skill in both computer-aided design and data analytics. And there was a graduate level student who was working on a couple of different programs for the company, and one of those particularly was to try and showcase polymer data, and forgive me because I'm jumping a little bit outside of my specialty area here, but polymer data going from an XY presentation of that data to go in three-dimensional and XYZ. Well, our student had those skills through the courses that they were taking in the pipeline to fulfill that, but the graduate level student didn't have the time to dedicate to fulfilling that. So we were able to team the two up. So here was a student at the graduate level who was on an internship. here was a high school student who was kind of doing a sub-internship to support what they were doing in terms of value added to the company.
Great, that is really helpful, and I'm thinking we might have gotten Laura, but I know the next question is really, again, for you, Dan. You know, you've shared a lot about the partnership and kind of the value add, but, you know, so from the school perspective, have you guys made any changes to the way you do business or the way you did business prior to this because of this partnership with the Workforce Development Board? You know, has the relationship helped the school to sort of broaden thinking around college and career readiness? If you could speak to that a little bit, that'd be helpful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We are undergoing a major redesign at the secondary level. I'll start with the middle school level. This work helped us spearhead 2 years ago a dramatic change to the way we were doing business in our middle schools. We converted our entire middle school programming to be project-based learning across multiple areas for whole child development. So now in our middle school, which we have one middle school with 1,350 students, all 1,350 students over the course of their middle school trajectory do project-based learning in the areas of engineering, information technology, and also the visual arts. Again, we try to keep in mind that whole student model under the umbrella of what most people call STEAM now. And so what we were starting to see was students involved in this pipeline were greatly benefiting from the development of their thinking in certain areas that our traditional high school model just wasn't tapping into, like collaboration, critical thinking, communication, and we also started to see a tremendous increase in our achievement results for the students that were participating in that type of interdisciplinary project-based environment. So beginning at the middle level, we spearheaded a whole model change for our school district, and now that change is extending into the secondary level, where under the umbrella of YCC, we continued, as Adelina spoke at the beginning, the development of our STEM early college pipeline, with the STEM theme sort of out in front of what we were doing for students. We've now expanded for the upcoming 2018-19 school year to do entrepreneurship and also the fine arts through the avenue of design as 3 thematic learning experiences that any 9th and 10th grade student can experience while they're at Marlborough High School, and it's a whole student model. So it's no longer just a pipeline, it's now become the way we do business for all kids across 9th and 10th grade. Again, to expand their thinking in certain areas that traditional curriculum just doesn't tend to tap into, but then also to exploit 2 words that often get thrown around in education, but there's really no evidence that they're happening, and that's rigor and relevance. And so we were able to sort of say, well, what is rigor? And rigor is challenging a student's thinking in the classroom in what we like to say applied or meaningful ways as our approach. And so to be able to expand that across 3 areas thematically is very exciting for us. And then, of course, the relevance, the reason why we chose entrepreneurship, design, and STEM goes back to our partnership with the local Workforce Investment Board, what we've learned now from listening to our industry partners, that those are really the 3 themes that are growing across the global economy. You know, you think about STEM, entrepreneurship, and design are really the 3 themes that just can't be beat right now in terms of what's happening in the global economy. So as a school, we are adapting to that strategically, but it's a big transition for us. But everyone is very excited about the transition because they understand the impact now from watching what this single YCC pipeline has done for a fraction of the students.
That is really awesome to hear. Thank you for responding to that question. And really, you know, all of our team is here excited to hear kind of what this YCC impact has been. We have just a few minutes left. This was a 45-minute session. We've moved through it very quickly, but I have two remaining questions, one around sustainability and then one around lessons learned. And so I want to ask this for Dan and Laura. If Laura did make it on, Joanna, if you can find her and unmute her on the phone if you're there. But for Laura and Dan, how will the relationship continue once the YCC grant ends? And what has your sustainability planning look like? And if you can answer this in a couple minutes, that would be great. And then we'll have one more question after this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura, if you are on and you want to interrupt.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Laura. Why don't you start since you haven't spoken yet?
I was gonna have you set it up, Dan, from the perspective of the school, and then I'll fill in regarding the WIB.
Yeah, so from the school perspective, this has helped us transition from these types of experiences being a nice to have to being a need to have. So the conversation happening at the district level involving the school board, the superintendent, and even the mayor of the city is that we can't afford not to have this collaboration ongoing within our high school. So that's a wonderful thing because the buy-in is extremely important. And we've expanded the collaboration on this. Like I mentioned, the mayor of the city. What I didn't mention is that we also have recently had the Secretary of Labor for the state of Massachusetts involved in these conversations. And again, it puts the value on what work is happening and the need to maintain it. So with that, in terms of sustainability, what we've tried to do is build as much as we can into the LEA budget. Again, that's what I will often say to my colleagues in other school districts. That's what defines a shift from nice to have to need to have, is that it actually gets built into your budget. When it's grant funded, it's the only way to ensure that it's going to continue after the grant ends.
And along with that, in addition to being built into the budget, Dan, well said, is being built into the schedule. And so the sustainability that will continue with the WIB, which will continue to be a partner, is to ensure that guidance and teachers and, of course, school leadership with Dan will have this need-to-have structure of 9 through 12 career readiness in all kinds of programming within the school day, so that it's not relegated to an office somewhere where a student has to find it, but that everyone in the school is engaged in career readiness and through integrating coursework with career pathways. And so that's, having guidance on board, having guidance counselors aware of career opportunities and programs so that when they're visited by students regularly, they're connecting the dots with them, and having career readiness, career specialists engaged from 9 through 12 in the curriculum of students. And
I have one other example, which is
to
link this to the IDP, the individual development plans, in that the work-based learning experiences are all incorporated into that IDP process for students in 9 through 12. What's really neat about all this work that's been driven through YCC is about a year and a half ago, we were approached by the State Department in Massachusetts in their planning for what was called the early college designation process, but that contained a component that Massachusetts was calling its MyCAP, My Career and Academic Planning. So the work of YCC, which fueled our development of our individual development plan trajectory, then influenced what the state is now using across any school that wants to be designated as an early college site, incorporating that career piece. So this work has been very influential, not just in our own community, but statewide, and I just wanted to point that out.
Great, thank you both. That is very exciting. And I know we're very close on time here. I want to ask one more question of you guys, and that is, you know, if folks listening in have not been able to build these partnerships with their workforce boards or are hoping to strengthen their existing ones, what kind of lessons learned do you have, or tips or strategies that you can share for the audience? And that's to either Dan or Laura.
Well,
do you want to start there, Dan? Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, Laura. Thank you. I think the key is to start the communication and not to let it end. It's easy to get buried in a bunch of different things that are going on within the school district or within the schools. This is truly essential. If we're going to start to prepare students for the 21st century, then we have to get the industry component of that conversation going, or else we're so often going to come up short. And even with a recognized STEM early college high school program, it wasn't until we got really into the weeds of the conversation with the local WIB that we understood how short we were still coming up, even with an innovative program already in place. So get the conversation going. Don't let it end. It's critical for students because it will help you as a school district rethink how you're doing business for students, which in most traditional style districts, we're still way off.
And I would just emphasize that piloting data-driven solutions on the ground where you can, starting small with, you know, engaged entities in your school district that are connected or want to be connected with industry, is a great place to start. You can only learn by trying and doing. So pilots are really critical to this process rather than trying to wrap your arms around the entire solution. Piloting 9 through 12 and connecting point people between the school and industry is critical.
Great, thank you very much. That is really helpful. I am looking at the time and I'm looking at a few questions that have come in. One question that I did see, and now I just kind of scrolled down, was around scheduling. And we see that one barrier that Janice Bailey-Jan has seen in working with 11 high schools is the student schedule to incorporate this type of experience. She would be interested in you addressing how you established a student schedule so that there's time in their high school day to participate in work-based learning. So we'll take this one question, and then unfortunately we have run out of time, but if anybody can kind of address that one, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, sure. So unfortunately, it can come down to individual state policy, this question. In Massachusetts, we are afforded the flexibility to structure the student academic day and incorporate a work-based learning experience, for example, as academic time on learning. So we don't fall short of our criteria of meeting the hours we have to meet for every student each year. And so what we've done at the senior year is we've devised a split day within our rotation. So our students come to school in the morning and they fulfill up to 3 academic classes that help them continue to march towards fulfilling graduation requirements. And then in the afternoon, that's when they participate essentially in their work-based learning experience, like the GE Health interns right now, and or they're involved in the early college experience. So we didn't talk much about that component of our program, but that also occurs during the second half of the day where they travel to the college campus and they take college classes throughout their senior year, the second half of the day.
Great, thanks, Dan. And I know there were a few other questions. We're sorry we didn't get to it. This 45-minute session went very quickly. This information was amazing. I think Adelina, Laura, Dan, we thank you so much. Laura, we were glad you were able to get on the last little bit and end this strong. So thank you all for sharing your wonderful information about your partnerships.